that allows them. I mean, that's mostly all we do.
No, and they said that he came to your
Yeah, Bill and Tiffany.
well, we were
Well,
I've gone back.
Real.
way back.
Comes out the inside of that bore all the way down, and he'll bring it back out. The other thing that it does is if there's any kind of embers still burning down inside that tube, it will put it out so that the next cannon round will go off prematurely. So then after the gunner, or excuse me, the cannoneer sponges it, he flips that around and he uses this end to seat that cartridge to get ready to fire, which we're going to do in a few minutes if you want us to. You want us to? All right, we'll do it for you then.
Can we go ahead and follow him in?
If it's time, Captain, is it time?
It is time.
Cannoneers!
My name is Jerry Wooten. I'm the park manager here. We're doing some good stuff. This is part of our Living History weekend number 2. This is the Johnsonville Federal Garrison. Most of these guys are full-time Park Service Rangers from other parks that have scheduled to be here to help us out this weekend. So good to have these guys here. We also have a contingent of volunteers that come out and are part of our garrison. The garrison that we normally portray is an infantry garrison, which was the 43rd Wisconsin. And we do that generally in February and November. And then in May, we have our artillery weekend where we change roles and we're fulfilling the roles of the 1st Kansas Battery that was here at Johnsonville during the Civil War. And there was another...
Dry fire!
There was actually another battery that was USCT's, United States Colored Troops. It was the 2nd Light Artillery Battery. They're not going to be firing. They're going to go through a couple of dry run-throughs here in just a minute. But we also had a number of Confederate gunners that participated in this battle, but they were across the river. So Nathan Bedford Forrest attacked Johnsonville on November the 4th, and this became a massive artillery duel. So artillery played a significant role in the late war Battle of Johnsonville in 1864. This is one of the last great Confederate victories of the war in the Western Theater. The success of this battle was from the Confederate side. Nathan Bedford Forrest succeeded in almost complete total destruction. 80% of Johnsonville burned to the ground.
Ready!
There was over 24 cannons that were used in this battle. Some of these artillery pieces were actually mounted on the gunboats that were at the wharf, which was right on the riverbank.
Fire!
The field pieces, like you see here, is actually a 10-pound Parrott rifle. That's the actual name of the gun itself. Johnsonville's garrison had about 10 of these guns on site, so that is an authentic gun. It's not an artifact, but it's a reproduction of an original Parrott rifle. It's actually made for reproduction uses. Today we won't be firing a round. You know, we're not actually firing a projectile, but we're firing a blank charge to give you some idea. Now we're only firing 8 ounces of black powder. And that's a can of black powder is 16 ounces, so we're using half of that. So in the Civil War, in order to actually fire the projectile down the field, down the range, you would have used an entire pound of powder. So if you've been to Shiloh and those battlefields, you can just imagine the impact with having over 300 guns in one spot at one time. It just would have been deafening. And I think today you'll get a little taste of that. The wind's been blowing in this direction most of the day. So when you see the smoke that's generated from this, it'll blow it back into your faces and you'll get a big woof of this rotten egg smell, and that's the black powder that was used, the sulfur used to make the black powder. We will be doing our annual Living History event on the commemoration weekend of November the 1st. Let's see, this year it's November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Next year is a big year for us. That's, we're right in the middle of the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. The 150th of Johnsonville, we're basically rededicating this park. It'll be a massive event. I hope you guys can come. We'll have hundreds of reenactors here, artillery, infantry, civilians, a lot going on. So plan, that's going to be November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. We invited Governor Haslam to come down and rededicate the park. Wow. Cabins like this are being constructed right now. We're mounting cannons. You see the empty carriage over here. That's actually a permanent gun that will be on the field all the time. If you've been to Shiloh and those places, you see those cannons. So that one's actually going into concrete and will be there permanently as an exhibit. And also we've set up a number of wayside exhibits through the park that tell you more about the battle. But getting back to the artillery, what you're looking at here today, this is a typical layout of the men that would have been required to fire this one piece. My position as a lieutenant or a captain would have been over the entire section, and that section normally would have been 4 to 6 guns. So you would have had a corporal or maybe a sergeant acting as a gunner, which Mr. Wells is portraying, and he would have been in charge of this specific piece. So when I felt that it was necessary that this position looked good, I would turn the firing command over to this person right here, and he would take charge of that piece. So what he's going to do at this point is do a mock run-through of the positions, and as he's doing that, I'm going to interpret what these specific men and their number are doing in order to fire this piece. So, Mr. Wells?
5 seconds, fuse shot!
Okay, number 1, you see the man with the sponge rammer.
Yes!
Send the sponge down the barrel to make sure there weren't any sparks from the previous fire. You would then turn around, tap the muzzle of the barrel with the hard end, which is the rammer. The powder monkey would then bring the round up. The number 2 man would step up, take the round, turn in the direction away from the barrel, and load it with the powder end inside. Since we're not using a projectile, we've got peat moss on the other end. And we use that peat moss basically as just something to pack the black powder in when we fire the blank round. So he would then load the cannon with the round. The number 3 man would step in with his priming wire, put a small hole in the pouch in the back. Then the number 4 man would step out to the left with the lanyard, and using the body weight, he would just lean into it with the tension of the lanyard, and that would cause the gun to go off. He actually, in his pouch, in that brown belt around his waist, he had priming friction primers. And it's just like if you saw the infantry program that had the little brass cap, it was the same thing, except it was long with a little extension on it. You hook the lanyard to that, and when you yank that, that would create a spark that shoots through the vent in the back where the black powder is. So essentially what you're doing in an artillery piece is that you're controlling a small explosion, a massive explosion, going on in the back of that breech. So you've got the pieces of the gun as the muzzle is the front. You've got the chase, which is the center part, that thin part. And on the Parrott rifles, in the very back, you see that ring. That's called the reinforcement. That's the breech. That's where basically all the weight and the explosion is taking place. So that explosion is being alleviated by the opening in the front of the gun. So when the weapon's fired, it sends these projectiles down the field with this particular gun about 1,500 to 1,700 yards. So you can imagine, you know, the people over at Pebble Owl would be in peril right now. The long wooden stick that you see to the back is called a trail spike. When he stepped up, when the gunner stepped up, you saw the number 3 man who's on the back right side of the big wheel on the right, who would step back and he would reposition the gun. If he needed to point the gun in a particular direction, number 3 would step back using the trail spike and turn the gun. When the gunner felt that he was in range, he would give that touchdown sign like this, which would tell the whole crew, especially the powder folks back here at the limber, that the gun was about to be fired. Now, these folks standing back here at the limber usually had a pistol. They were armed because, you know, if the battery was overran, they're in a position here to be able to have to protect that powder and those projectiles, and themselves for that matter. So, okay, I think we're about ready to fire, Mr. Wells.
Cannoneers! Load! Canister! Yes!
Now, when he said yes, he was actually acknowledging in the bag when the powder monkey brought up the actual size of the ordnance round. So, being chief of the piece, he just acknowledged that yes, I'm seeing that there is a projectile going in. by shouting out yes, that informs the other cannoneers that are looking forward, they can't see, that a projectile is coming forward. And you'll see him give the sign if he feels comfortable on the positioning. And there's the signal that would tell these people back here that if there was an opening space, they needed to close it. Now he would prick the pouch in the back with the priming line, which caused a hole, and we're ready. You might want to plug your ears.
Fire!
Now, that gives you just one sense.
That's one way to
One gun.
squirrel out of a tree.
Yeah, times that by about 300, and that gives you some sense of the racketing noise that went on at Big Battle. Now, well-trained artillerists were required to do this 3 times in 1 minute.
Cease
So
fire!
they could go through this process in 20 seconds. So they honed this skill
Secure
so
the
perfectly
piece.
that they could fire this under fire within 20 seconds. And that's really moving. That's the powder monkey running back and forth and so forth. Okay, after this, we're going to have a musket firing demonstration on the next hour at 3 o'clock. So if you're interested in seeing the musketry and the demos on the musketry, come back in about 45 minutes. But before we leave, do y'all have any questions about the gun, Johnsonville, anything? And we'll reconvene here with musketry at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much. If y'all are interested.
Skills, girl.
I told her they're not out again.
Maybe a mark.
Run to that little low spot and eat up some ground, and then they're gonna try to listen.
Oh, it's really steaming off the roof.
As you see, it's kind of formed to
I don't get it right.
Build up inside the gun, and you're gonna.
Nice to meet you, Mr. White.
One new guy in to start working with him. And like I said, we'll have a new guy on limber, new guy as powder handler.
Tom, you gonna go and take this stuff and stash it then.
I was moved down.
And we will culminate this exercise letting Paul pull a friction primer, so he'll get the feel of the primer before we fire around. Okay. 1 and 2. Will set themselves right here at the front of the wheel. 3 and 4 right here at the back of the wheel. At no time, Paul, do you stand behind the wheel. You're either outside or inside. So when I give the command to load, back here, receive the cartridge from the men working the limber. Stop here. I inspect the cartridge, make sure it's correct. I will say yes, and then you deliver it up to number 2. Number 2 will extract it from the pouch. What's that? All right, so you go up, and then number 2 extracts the, and then you return that.
It does help that the open's flat when he does it.
All right. So you have the cartridge, turn. Number 2 introduces it into the muzzle. Go and tend the vent there, John. And then it's rammed down. Ceasefire. All right. From the top. Got to understand. Now, Paul, you just basically, during that loading, you stand at attention. You don't move anything until you hear ready. And what you can be doing, though, while the loading is going on, is preparing the friction primer. You can prepare the friction primer. So on the ready, Johnny steps in and you will step in right here. He will poke a hole in the cartridge. You introduce the friction primer. Go ahead, just pretend. Just lay it up there. There you go. Now, you play out the string, looking at John. Good. Put some tension on it, but not where you want all that tension or that slack out of it. Now, when you get to that point right here, here's what I'm going to suggest, or what I'm going to ask you to do. Have it down here behind you like so. You look at Johnny, when you're ready, nod, and he will step out. So now we are loaded and primed. As the gunner, I will look at everything, and I'll give you the command fire. It is critical, Paul, that you are looking away. After you nod, you look to your left, and then use your body weight to pull the lanyard as opposed to yanking it with your arm. So.
That is a pretty picture, Charles.
And it is. Load. Canister. Yes. Stay put. So when I'll come up, aim the piece. When I get back into position, the next command will be ready. Ready! Fire! Boom! Up! All right, gentlemen, one more time. One more time. Yes. Ready! Paul, make sure that you have all of the slack out of that line first, okay? Fire! Boom! Sir, stand at ease. Keep his back to the muzzle with his left hand. He will extract that. I want you to, to this point, to step up to the hub. He extracts the friction primer. He gets the wire from number 4. Excuse me. Now hand him a friction primer with lanyard attached. All right, now you can back into your normal position. This time you're going to keep eye contact with number 2. Same thing, you want the tension. He's going to tell you when he's ready. Or excuse me, you're going to do the nod with number 2. Then number 2 will tell me, ready? Fire! Boom! You like that, Mr. Forrest?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Canister! Yes. Ready! Fire! Boom! Defire! The ball in review. What you will hear is just that ignition device that would ignite the cannon if there was a cartridge in it. But in this case, all you will hear is the friction primer going off. Cannons! Load! Dry fire! Yes!
I don't even have to see the enemy. The GPS in my helmet knows where I am. When I laser that spot, the GPS knows where my bullet is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the rifle up to the top of the wall, and I'm going to fire. The bullet's going to go to that GPS coordinate, and as it passes the wall, then it's going to load behind the wall, and I'm going to have to shoot that.
Ready! Fire! Cease fire! You good, Ranger Ernest?
Yes.
You good? All right, we have a 3 o'clock musket demonstration. If you're also going 43rd Wisconsin, get your leathers on and get your musket out. Prepare for that.
They're kind of semi-retired. I think so.
Coffee.
Fire up coffee off the Yes, sir, I appreciate that. 4, and then our last firing today will be at 5. This is the last musket firing demonstration for today. Accompanying me here is Justin Rexroad and Aaron Shapley, I'm sorry, and Paula Ernest. They are all park rangers with Tennessee State Parks. All these folks actually are here today to help us with our program, our employees of the state park system. And our federal garrison, which is what we represent here, is actually made up of these employees. And it's worked out very good. We get together 3 times a year, February, May, and then for our commemorative event in November, and we would do programs. This one happens to be the artillery weekend. February was infantry. November will be a combination of both infantry and artillery. But right now I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about what these guys are wearing. The soldier Paul in the middle here is wearing a frock coat. By the time Johnsonville, the Battle of Johnsonville rolled around in 1864, that was a thing of the past. You saw the cheaper blouse, and this is referred to, you know, like a woman's shirt today in the military. That was a blouse. It was 100% wool. It was 4 buttons, like Aaron has over here, and sky blue pants. It was no different from the officers. The only difference is that, of course, the officers had to purchase everything they owned. So, you know, the blue stripe along my pants, my shoes, everything was a private contract. So I guess they figured since we made a little bit more money, we could afford to buy our own stuff. But typically what happened is that we ended up contacting mothers and aunts and sisters to actually produce these uniforms. So the colors sometimes were a little bit off. But these men were issued clothing, and being at a supply depot, there was plenty of stuff to go around. So you can imagine being the garrison troops that were charged with the responsibilities of guarding that supply base. They probably got a lot of the pickings of the good stuff before they sent them out to the field. Johnsonville was built for the sole purpose of supplying General William Tecumseh Sherman's army and his famous March to the Sea. How many have seen Gone with the Wind? Remember that scene where those federal soldiers are in her house ransacking everything? They're part of Sherman's troops. Those goods that they were wearing would have probably been coming here from Johnsonville. This road that you drove in on today was one of the rail spurs that came into Johnsonville. The second one is right, it's hard to see now that the trees are up, but it's right there. And they came in, there's 2 links that came into Johnsonville. You would have seen trains running through here 24 hours a day, non-stop. If you, when you leave here today, this is a nice trail that we just opened up. It's called our African American Cemetery Loop Trail. Johnsonville had a significant amount of USCTs, United States Colored Troops, that were assigned here, the 12th, 13th, and 100th USCT. And then manning these guns was the 2nd U.S. Light Artillery USCT. They're the men that were in the lower redoubt firing against Nathan Bedford Forrest on November the 4th. And they, even Morton, who was Nathan Forrest's chief of artillery, even said that the gunners in the lower fort hit us with extreme precision. So, you know, that was quite a credit, of course, to those gunners. The 1st Kansas Battery, who is the people that we are portraying today, actually manned the guns to the left of the lower redoubt. I'm sorry you can't get there today because the water is high, but if you walk up a trail, either this, when you get to see that brown sign on the other side of that, that's our forts trail, or you can go to the picnic area, walk to the back of the picnic area, and you'll pick up a white church trail. If you'll go straight to the top of the hill, you're following along a line of original earthworks built by these men in 1864 and the USCTs. Johnsonville had a 2,500 man garrison. When we portray infantry, we are portraying men in the 43rd Wisconsin. They were recruited in August of 1864, late in the war, and they basically came here to Johnsonville. This was their only assignment, to guard the supply depot here at Johnsonville. They were rear echelon troops. It means they weren't out in the front with General Sherman or Grant in Virginia fighting, you know, doing heavy battle. They were basically guarding things. So that's why the troops that you would have seen here were well equipped. A lot of them were very clean. A lot of them were very undisciplined. A lot of them didn't do much drill. But they had the accommodations that other soldiers in the field wish they would have had. One of those were cabins. We're in the process of producing 6 of these right here. Each cabin housed 2 men. We have a great description written by one of the members of the 43rd that describes the cabins. They were 9 by 9 with a brick or some kind of chimney. We have photographs. We're very lucky here at Johnsonville to have 5 existing photographs that show this place. It's extremely rare in the Western Theater. You see a lot of pictures over where Bobby Lee was fighting in the Eastern Theater, but very few in the West. We have 5 from Johnsonville. When we enhanced those at the new visitor center, we were able to see cabins like this that had white tops on them where they were throwing their tents over the top for a roof, and they were using barrels just like this stacked up for a chimney flue. It's very, very, very significant in what we're doing. Our chimneys, of course, are brick. The town of Johnsonville that built up around the depot employed civilians. So you had Navy here, you had Army, you had railroad workers, civilian workers, and then you had this entire town that built up around the military depot. About 60% of those civilians were African American. They were blacks. They were hired by the Army to work for the depot directly. So the caps that you see us wear, these things are called forge caps. Some are kepis. You've got more of a kepi on right there, which is based on a French casseur's hat. It's basically designed on the French Army. They're really worthless as far as keeping weather out of your face. You saw a lot of the Western troops go to a brimmed hat that were black, and the Federal Army basically adopted this idea that the soldiers, especially the Confederates, began calling them the black hats because they were able to shape them out and keep the rain out of their faces. If you ever seen a picture of a good Western Federal that's fighting, just like everybody, they're really filthy, a lot of disorder, they're carrying everything on their back. Here at Johnsonville, we weren't doing that. We looked like new troops out here in the field. There was a lot of mud, however, so they would have been muddy. But a lot of sitting around, a lot of lack of discipline going on here at Johnsonville. So we hope we can portray that to an extreme here.
Laziness.
Yeah, a lot of sitting around and lazy. Very authentic at this point. But so this area we're generating into basically a living history camp for our infantry. When you come back in November for our commemorative event, the artillery will be down at the riverfront where they would have been in place. And then we have another area up on top of the hill where we'll split up the infantry. So we'll have 3 activities going on. Our 150th anniversary is next November. Mark your calendars now. It's November 1st and 2nd. Governor Haslam's been invited. We're going to try to get him here to rededicate the park this day. So we're basically going to have these cabins finished. We're mounting cannons. We're mounting 6 cannons around the park right now. So the tubeless carriages that you see are getting prepared to have the cannon barrels mounted on top. Those barrels weigh about 1,200 pounds apiece, so we have to get a backhoe to lift those in there. But there'll be a permanent exhibit stationed around the park. Okay, getting back to the infantry here, the blue pants, the dark blue blouses. You see the number of accoutrements here. Such a slop. 43rd Wisconsin guy. United States buckles. You would see the Eagle breastplate, and most specifically, you would see an 1863 version Springfield compared to the 1842 that would have been carried prior to the war. This is what the troops in Mexico carried in fighting the Mexican-American War in 1847. By the time the Civil War rolls around 14 years later, they're carrying this gun. So it's modified. You can see the difference. It's shorter. This weapon's rifled. This is smoothbore. This had a maximum range of about 150 yards. This had a maximum killing range up to 400 to 450 yards. There is a couple of documented cases where a couple of marksmen, I still find this hard to believe, were able to hit a target at 800 yards. So, that's 8 football fields away. That's a pretty good shot without sights at that time. Anyway, they developed a more advanced sighting mechanism in the back. This was a very, very good weapon. It was very reliable as well. Also here at Johnsonville, they had a number of British-made weapons. The most popular, and especially with the USCTs, because the 12th and 13th, was this weapon. This was the Enfield rifle. It was a British-made weapon. Really, it was the far superior weapon over these other 2. On the day of the battle, we do have accounts that members of the 12th and 13th ran to the shore of this river right here, right to our front, and fired these Enfield rifles across the river at the Confederates. The casualties at the Battle of Johnsonville were very small. However, the devastation of what happened after that was the result of the burning of this entire depot. Basically what happened is the Union commander lost his nerve. He thought Forrest was going to ford the river above here, come around and take Johnsonville from the land side, which never occurred. So in doing so, what he did was order his lieutenant commander in charge of the Navy to scuttle the first 2 boats at the wharf to keep them from getting captured, because they were loaded down with supplies ready to go be shipped away. So Forrest's artillery, of course, knocked the rigging out of all the boats at the wharf. Today we have 4 of those boats that are sitting about 15 feet at the water down there. 2 of those have been identified. Some of them are pretty scattered. But those wrecks are still out there in the river. Most of the transports and the boats that were destroyed that day was a total of 26. So it was a tremendous amount of loss. The fires that were set spread across the depot. The winds were up that day and basically burned most of the buildings down. So the Union Army themselves were the cause of those fires. Forrest did, he zeroed in on a number of barrels of whiskey like this that were stockpiled on the wharf. What happens when you shoot whiskey? What happens? It's a spirit, right? It's going to inflame.
It burns, yeah.
And some of the accounts by Morton are that those barrels of whiskey rolled down the wharf in a blue streak of flame, and they ran into those boats and caught the other boat. It was just mass pandemonium that day, but it was a big Confederate victory. All right, to get these troops ready for battle, they went through a series of steps that I'm going to run you through real quick. And they're going to step over here and fire a volley for you at one time under Paul's leadership here. And they'll give you some idea of what 3 muskets sounded like going off. Times that by about 100,000. That gives you some idea of what other men may have experienced at big battles like Gettysburg. So, first command was load in 9 times, load. To go to the shoulder arms, I'm sorry. Load in 9 times, load. The weapon would be placed in between their feet like this and extended at an arm's length. Now what you're going to see here is not something they were doing on the field. When they got out into a battle, they were just expected to know how to do this. So as an officer or NCO, I would train them in steps on loading this weapon. So we're not going to put powder in front of you for safety reasons. We're not going to load these till we get over there, but we're going to go through the steps. The next command was handle cartridge. On their hip is a leather cartridge box that held 40 rounds, 20 in the top and 20 in the bottom. The tins looked like this. These have been excavated from numerous Civil War battlefields. A lot of them they fell out. There are millions of percussion caps that I'll show you here in a minute. But the top held 10 rounds, and the tips of those stuck out like that with a mini ball on top. Excuse me, on the bottom. So this was kept in the cartridge box, and these men generally carried a knapsack where they had another extra 40 rounds in their knapsack. So the next command after handle cartridge was tear cartridge. Okay, what do you think one of the requirements of being an infantry soldier was in 1861?
Teeth.
Teeth. You're not going to be any good as an infantryman if you didn't have your teeth, because how could you tear the cartridge? You'd be off in the artillery somewhere. So you had to have your teeth in order to stick that cartridge there and rip the cartridge open, because your other hand is doing what?
Holding it right.
It's holding on to the weapon. So you can't just drop that. So, you know, you had to be able to rip that cartridge open. Next command, charge, which means pour cartridge. So they pour the powder. So think about it. You know, you're ripping that tag off. The powder's exposed. You dump the powder, and then you weren't done, because you had to take the bullet out of this paper cartridge and press it tight. And it's just not going to drop. You know, there's rifling grooves in there, so it's sitting there. So how was I going to get the bullet down on the powder that's already been dropped down to the bottom?
Ramrod.
Not the ramrod, the rammer. So the next command, I did the same thing. I watched too much Davy Crockett growing up, calling that thing the ramrod. It is a rammer. So the next command was draw rammer. It would be flipped around. On the inside of this is conical shape to fit over the top point of the conical shaped ball. It's grooved. So they stick that down and then The next command was ram cartridge. He's doing a pretty good job imitating how that would have been. You know, they didn't just drop down. You got to think, you're sitting there trying to seek that, looking forward all the time because the guy 100 yards across the field is trying to kill you. So you're trying to see where he is and really pack that down, just like Tim, the #1 guy, did on the cannon, if you saw that earlier. He put that rammer in there and came forward and hit it, and then hit it one more time to make sure it was seated. So he's doing the same thing with this. Return, rammer. And then, of course, part of the load 9 times, they were trained to return rammer with their smallest pinky. I think they all failed because they're green troops, just like me. The officer wouldn't have known to tell them that, but in the manual it was like this. Why do you think they wouldn't have done this?
In case the weapon was to discharge and
Right.
accidentally
You know,
misfire.
y'all fired fireworks the 4th of July. Black powder fouls miserably. It's unpredictable. You know, in the heat of July, such as Gettysburg, there could have been a spark left in the bottom of that musket. Premature misfires happen all the time. So this thing could have gone off, there's your hand. So they were trained to do that. So the weapon's not fully loaded yet. The next step, number 6, was prime. Prime.
Mind your muzzle.
I'll tell you, these green troops, what are you going to do? Turn that way so they can see. So when he came to the position of prime, the box that's right here was lined up directly right underneath this hammer. So he'd reach in and pull out a small cap. These are the literally millions and millions found. Of course, they didn't quite have that flange on the end, the originals. It was just the hat part, the tall part. But it's a brass cap. A lot of them were produced in the Springfield arsenal. That's fulminate of mercury in there. There's a tiny amount of mercury inside this thing. It's toxic. So basically what that is just a pressure sensitive chemical. So on prime, they stuck that cap on the cone. Some folks have referred to this as a nipple, but that in the military terms is called the cone. So that was placed on the cone, just like that, and it sticks. Now the weapon was ready to fire. What do you think the last 3 commands of that firing sequence were?
Ready, aim, fire.
Okay, good enough.
That's the best 3. Right?
Good guess.
That's the best 3.
Okay, yeah, ready, aim, and fire. So they would be, and it wouldn't be that fast, you know, it would be a long, drawn out, ready, and usually being done by the drum or the bugle. Because it's not just 3 guys. You know, you got a regiment of 1,000 men with a colonel sitting on a horse giving these commands to field grade officers. Aim! And everybody would just put their guns forward at one time, and then fire would be given. And what you would have is just this massive amount of lead balls being discharged at one time into one certain section, usually about 50 feet to 60 feet wide, into a general section to just do absolute devastation. And that was how they kept up a rate of fire. And then he would just give a command to load and fire at will. And when that happened, they would just keep this continuous rate of fire going, doing these steps. Y'all can go to order on. Okay, before we step out and conclude the program over to the right here, I want to open the floor up. Does anybody have any questions about Johnsonville or the uniforms of the soldiers or anything maybe that went on here or during the war? I'll try to answer it.
Casualty numbers, both sides?
Very low at Johnsonville. There were 11 casualties on the Union side. There was 1 casualty on the Confederate side caused by a limb that was broken and fell across one of the guns and killed the gunner #1. Where's Tim? Okay, he's over there. He's okay. But and that was from the precision fire of those artillerists in the lower redoubt. But very few casualties, probably because of the distance over that river, and also because Forrest, being the master that he was, took the biggest gamble of his military career and pulled his guns right to the level of the riverfront. So they weren't way over there on Pilot Knob. They were right down on the river. If you go down there today, you'll see an island that's sitting out there all by itself from the lake. That's what's remaining of the western shore of the Tennessee River. That's where Forrest was at. Actually, Sergeant Zaring's section was right there on that exact spot. And he was firing directly into the depot. And if you stand there on our bank today and look at that, it's not that far. It's the length of 2 football fields. And that's the width of the Tennessee River in 1864. All right. Mr. Ernest is going to take charge of the section. We're going to turn about. We're going to walk over here and fire a volley at you. So, sir, if you want me to command, I'll do it. You're welcome to plug your ears. It's not going to be the explosion you heard out of the artillery, the one you'll hear coming up, but you may want to just do this. Company, shoulder, arms.
Okay.
Ready. Go to the ready. Are you loaded? Okay. Go back to shoulder. I'm sorry. See, green officers too.
Wisconsin streets, huh?
Load! And you know, when the officer gave that, he wouldn't say loaded 9 times. He would just give one order, load. They would have known how to go through those steps and load their weapon. And you know, this would just come in their sleep naturally. They would do this so much that you wouldn't have to think about it. And that's, you know, that's what the officers are trying to do, is get these men trained where they weren't having to think about it in a battle. And they did a very good job at Johnsonville. I mean, everybody that participated here, as much as they could, from what we've read, the Union soldiers did a very good job here. So did the Confederates. Of course, the Union garrison here was up against probably the most experienced Confederate contingent out of the entire war, facing them down those barrels. So imagine that challenge.
Jerry, tell them how fast the guy sees them.
Once they were trained to do this, they were supposed to be able to do this by themselves in 20 seconds. So if you can imagine those steps, you know, I've got it down where I can do it in about 15. But you know, you're basically like when you're pulling the rammer out, you're already going to prime, and you could just go through these steps. And I'm sure it even got faster than that. But you know, 3 rounds per minute is what was expected of the men. So you know, 15 to 20 seconds, that's pretty quick to load this muzzle loading weapon with a rammer and return the rammer. That's what takes the most time, is returning the rammer. But it's the most important piece on the weapon, because if you didn't have the rammer, you've got an 11-pound club to swing around. You know, there's no way you're going to be able to load the next round. A prime example of that, order arms. A prime example of that is at Shiloh in 1930. A man and his wife were walking around on the battlefield, and as he was out there, he kicked up a ramrod. It was left over from the Battle of Shiloh. And he bent down and picked it up, and it was all tangled in the leaves and been there you know, for the last 80 years. He stepped to his left and found another one. As it turns out, they found 40 of them in a row, directly in a line, marking a battle line of Mississippian soldiers that were overran the Battle of Shiloh and pushed back suddenly so quick they didn't have time to return their rammers. So they were in the middle of loading their weapons, and all of a sudden there was this massive charge to their left, and they dropped everything and ran. So that marked an actual line where the battlefield came back later and said, yes, this is where the 6th Mississippi stood in the Battle of Shiloh. So, yeah. Shoulder, arm. Ready. Aim. Fire. Recover, arm. Order, arm. About, face. In place, ready. Well, the wind was up, and it took the odor away, but some of you may have smelled it. It smells like rotten eggs. That's the sulfur in the black powder. And in the summer heat of Gettysburg, which this is 2 months from now is the 150th anniversary. That smoke hung around in those hollows for days in stagnant heat with no wind. So you can imagine what that smelled like. Okay, we're going to be moving into our last 2 artillery firings here in the next 30 minutes. But before I break here, does anybody have any question about the infantry soldier? That's our final musket firing for the day. These guys, y'all want to come on back up. These guys will be around to answer any questions about the equipage. If you'd like to talk to them, take some photographs. If not, 4 o'clock we'll have our next to the last artillery fire. Thank you.
Back, and then I thought, well, nobody's ever going to find me back here.
Sometimes a little too bad.
Don't let me get in the way. Kansas boys taking a break.
We're actually working.
Dry fire!
Very active.
Load!
It was one of the favorite guns of artillerists, both sides. A lot of the Confederate cannoneers thought this was a very superior gun. A lot of the guns that Forrest used to attack Johnsonville were captured federal guns in a raid actually that was made at Union City, Tennessee, and Trenton, Tennessee in 1864. So a lot of the guns that we had attacking Johnsonville were actually captured U.S. guns. Very similar to what you see right here. And what they're going through is a series of steps that it took to fire one of these cannons. So as section chief, I would be responsible for the full battery, which may be 4 or 6. So I'd be back here as this officer.
Ready!
Giving these specific commands for that guy who's serving as the gunner, was his position, who's actually in charge of this particular piece. And they're just going through practice through. In just a minute, we're actually going to fire the round. So I'll let you know when that takes place.
Fire! Boom!
We're here today to portray the 1st Kansas Battery that was one of the actual units that was assigned to Johnsonville as artillery, along with the 2nd U.S. Colored Light Artillery, which were United States colored troops that were manning the cannon in the lower battle. 1st Kansas was pulled up to their left, and they participated in the battle as well. They slept on arms that night up here near the upper redoubt. So we have 2 intact forts in this park. Addition. Those forts participated. Now the day after the battle, they started adding more.
Load! Load! Canister shot!
Well-trained artillerists, very much like the infantry, could be expected to do this within 20 or 25 seconds. So, you're really going through these steps, and your number 6 guy, the powder monkey, was constantly had to be somebody in shape. They were running back and forth delivering this armor. So when you're in the heat of battle, this person never stopped. And, the second that he set that round in number 2's hands, he's going to set it into the muzzle of the barrel. And then number 1's already going to be ready there with the rammer, waiting at the base of the muzzle to ram it home, to push it down. One of the key positions here is, of course, number 3. He comes to the rear of the gun to sight it. You saw the touchdown signal that the gunner just gave. That signal to these guys back here that the piece was ready to be fired. Number 3 would take the priming wire, push it all the way through, exposing a small hole into the powder. And then number 4 just placed a friction primer in. Now we're going to fire. If you'll hold your ears.
Fire!
Yeah. So that gives you an idea of just 8 ounces of powder. Or they would have loaded over a pound sometimes just to be able to push that through this side. You have a much bigger explosion. This is 3. So, you have pretty good size work. Now,
what they're doing right now, after every stop, number one would have to turn the sponge around to see up in the area that was wet, it's damp. And really one of the key people is number three. You see he's got a thumb stall on, and he's holding that vent because as he sends that sponge down through there, you don't want the suction to happen. You don't want the air to fan a spark that's still back there.
Secure the piece!
Premature explosion to kill everybody. It did happen in the war. So if the number three ever lost the suction out of that thumb stall, you could possibly have a fan spark in the back that could cause a premature disfire. So that was a very, very important position. The section chief, which was myself, would basically at the ceasefire, the order to cease fire, would give the command, and then the sergeant of the section would just yell cease fire, and basically everybody would come back and do their position. He would always clean the piece, secure it, and wait the next order. So, anyway, that's pretty much how the field artillery was fired. That was the process. We'll be doing one more round today to close out the event at 5 p.m. That'll be our last firing for the day. So you guys are welcome to explore. The park's still open for 2 more hours. We don't close till 6. So feel free to explore. I'm sorry, the lower area is flooded. We're underwater right now, but the upper area is open. Any questions?